The next step in the evolution of the God image is individuation. That is the discovery of the psyche, and it refers to the psychological level which understands religious imagery as the phenomenology of the objective psyche. And it's not hard to see the phenomenology of the objective psyche everywhere you look. You see it every time you go out on the highway. Recently, I had to drive from Boston, Massachusetts to my home in Maryland, a 10-hour drive. Overnight, I started at 5 p.m. and arrived home at 3 a.m. During that drive, I had no idea what the other people in the other cars were, who they were, what kind of people they were they good people, bad people, whatever. But what did happen was that they all followed the rules, so I got home safely. That's an example of the collective unconscious and the objective psyche. You could say it's the hand of God. Okay, if as you're driving down the road, you could say that it is the hand of God that is keeping you safe. People drive down the road as if they're on rails, and most of the time everything is fine. Once in a while there's an accident. Well, a very religious person could say an accident is, well, that person must have done a bad thing. But really, in the God image, in our psyche, bad things do happen, and we need to recognize that. But we also can recognize that because we're all living in the same country with the same set of rules for driving, we can trust that everyone will pretty much follow those rules as much as possible because they keep us all safe. Now, near my house, there's one stop sign where many cars will come off of an interstate highway at the same time. And so there's maybe 20 or 30 cars at a time piled up behind that stop sign. Actually, now I've been talking about it a few times on videos, and now they've actually put a blinking red light at that stop sign. Really changes nothing. The issue at that stop sign is coming up from the left is very high-speed traffic. And most of the time, there's no traffic coming up from the left. And so if you roll through that stop sign without fully stopping, nothing's going to happen. But that's taking the rules into your own hands. That's making a godlike decision that the rules can be disobeyed this time. Now, most of the time, that's correct. First of all, there's not many cars coming up from the left. And secondly, there's very rarely a police officer there. I did on one occasion, I've gone through that stop sign several hundred times, and on one occasion I did see a police officer sitting right next to that stop sign. And I did see a motorist ahead of me go through the stop sign, and he was immediately stopped by the police officer. He broke the rules. He knew he was breaking the rules, and he was caught. But most of the time, we can make a godlike decision in a situation like that and be safe. And we pretty much better because there's 20 or 30 cars behind us. Most of the cars behind you do expect you to break the rules, and so they're not expecting to fully stop all 20 or 30 times before they get to the stop sign, where they have no intention of stopping. And so if you do stop, you might cause a pileup of cars behind you. And so there's a trade-off between the law and catastrophe. Now, in Jungian psychology, we're thinking of that as walking a line between order and chaos. Our society is built in such a way that we walk a narrow line between order and chaos. We rely on everyone to follow the rules, and if you're out on a superhighway, there are many people that you are passing, and you have no idea whether they're reliable people, good people, bad people. criminals, whatever, you have no idea. But, oh, by the way, almost everyone follows the rules. Now, once in a while, I get cut off by a motorcyclist going 70 miles an hour. That's unfortunate because I assume that someone that breaks that rule or breaks a rule that blatantly may very well end up as a death statistic in our annual averages. When you see someone breaking a traffic law, I always say, well, they're going to be in this year's statistics. And I suspect that they very often are. Maybe I'm wrong, but in any case, we rely on this transpersonal self, what Dr. Jung calls the collective unconscious, the transpersonal self. It's also called the God image. And when you have an experience of this God image, then you know. You don't need to believe in anything. You know that things are protected. For example, Americans know pretty much the way another American will behave. Of course, there's a spectrum of behavior between very outrageous and rowdy Americans and very soft women who go to church every morning. But nonetheless, we know that in certain areas, all Americans will behave the same. And so, for example, when we were attacked on 9/11, immediately across the country we saw American flags fly off the shelves, and everybody was American first, and you saw many American flags flapping over cars going down the interstate highway. And so we all do have something that we know we rely on, which is not us personally, but is the transpersonal self. It is what it means to be an American. All of us know in our hearts. The same is true for every nationality. Every nationality has a different meaning for what it means to be that nationality. But think about it. If your home is attacked, you're going to defend it, pretty much. And that's a transpersonal reaction. That's a psychological reaction. So once you start to perceive that these things are happening psychically, then you can understand that there is a psychological layer that goes over the universal monotheism. Now, I think in terms of a few things that have happened to me in church. For example, one time I was carrying one of my grandchildren around a church as part of the baptismal process, and I was showing him to various members of the congregation. And as I showed the baby, I realized that there was a special light that was coming on the faces of my fellow members of the congregation. And that light, to me, was telling me that the purpose of introducing the baby to the congregation was to bind the baby to the congregation and seek the security of the congregation and the trust of the congregation. The purpose of that ritual was to make it the responsibility of the congregation members to be protectors of this child. And I had this experience. It was an experience. It was a religious experience. It was an experience of a special light coming onto the faces of the members of the congregation as I showed this baby around. You may have had many other different religious experiences, but I equally consider it a religious experience that I could drive 10 hours from Boston, Massachusetts to Maryland overnight in the dark, passing literally thousands of other Americans in many different cars of different maintenance records, etc., and get here perfectly safely. that was an example of the transpersonal self protecting me, my wife, and my mother-in-law during that long trip. We can have further discussion about religious experiences and what they are. There are many videos on this channel which refer to a religious experience I had on camera on January 31st, 2017, and you can see it in one of the videos. I'll put a link to it under this video. Now, Dr. Edinger, I'm referring back, I'm still talking about The New God Image by Edward Edinger. And Dr. Edinger said that there are 3 steps involved in understanding what Jung is talking about in his material concerning the new God image. The first is to understand how the God image developed over many, many years in whatever society you happen to be in. But it's an archetypal image, and even if you're an atheist, you have a God image. Let's suppose that you're an atheist and you want to have a Maserati or a Ferrari in your driveway. Well, you dream and dream and dream of having the Maserati in your driveway. So maybe you make money your God. Except the problem is that when you get the Ferrari, you find out that it needs maintenance just like your Toyota Camry, and it gets you to the same places pretty much at the same speed as your Toyota Camry, and it doesn't make you any happier. Your mind, if your God is money, once you have the Ferrari in your yard and you find out that didn't make you happy, then you think, oh, well, if only I had a this or that, that would make me happy. But in the end, none of those things can make you happy. You have to have spiritual happiness, and that only comes from having a meaning to your life. What is the meaning of your life? Now, Dr. Edinger was talking about 3 steps involved in having this realization, which in Jungian psychology terms we call individuation. The first is to understand the steps by which you personally got to the place you are in the world. And that took place over millions of years. Okay, you have ancestors going back in an unbroken chain back to amoeba. And all of those creatures that were your fathers and mothers over the years each had an image of what they were doing. And in order for you to understand psychology, you need to understand that you are developed from those creatures, and you're developed by the history that those creatures experienced over many years. I mean, the fact that a meteor killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago is certainly relevant in each of our lives. Okay, because if that hadn't happened, maybe the world would be completely different from the way it is today. What if dinosaurs had survived and what if dinosaurs had survived and remained the dominant species on the planet? So many, many, many different things led up to who you are and what you are today. And each one of us is the result of literally millions of random accidents that got us to where we are today. In many ways, we can talk about it at length. But the first step in understanding the individuation process is to understand that we are the result of this evolutionary process, not only in our physiology, not only in our bodies, but also in our psyches. Okay, the second step is to see the new God image that Dr. Jung was talking about, and that's a matter of experience. I'll read to you what Dr. Edinger said is the second step. The second step then follows from the seeing of the new God image Jung is talking about. He is not imposing it by fiat. Rather, he is teaching us how to perceive for ourselves what he is talking about. It is not a matter of accepting this idea on faith. Quite the contrary. It is a matter of perceiving it for yourself. So I've tried to give you a few examples to allow you to see how these things develop, but you yourself must see it in your own life. If you see it in your own life, then you're on the way to understanding what the new God image is. And then the third step is to participate in the continuing incarnation of the God image, because the God image didn't stop developing in the middle of the 20th century or whatever. It's obviously developing onward and onward, and it's going to evolve if the human species is going to survive. Obviously, the idea that my religion is right and yours is wrong, and therefore you must die, is not going to go very far. Or if it's going to happen, it's going to cause just horrific tragedy throughout the world. What we might better do is, rather than think about all the ways we are different, think about all the ways that we are the same, and to try to find the good things that the other religions are doing that we should follow, and try to gradually develop the religion of the species to something that makes more sense for more members of the society. A good example is the fact that Muslims pray 5 times a day. What could be bad with that? If we all pray 5 times a day, then we take a spiritual perspective to our lives, and that's not a bad thing. And so perhaps it is a good thing to talk about how Jews and Christians and Hindus can all learn something from Muslims who pray regularly 5 times a day. It makes sense. Dr. Edinger goes on, then the third step, after seeing the reality of this new God image as it lives itself out in one's own individual psychology, as well as in the psychology of the collective, is an awareness of what the individual can do to help the process of transformation of this God image. That is what is meant by the process of continuing incarnation. Now, do keep in mind that throughout Dr. Jung's work, he had to persistently and consistently say that when he was talking about God, he was never talking about the metaphysical God. Dr. Jung never talked about the God that you find in church, or you find in the temple, or you find in the mosque. Dr. Jung was talking about the God image only, the God image being an archetypal image that lives in our psyches. That's all he was talking about. We can all benefit by understanding what Dr. Jung was talking about, because he's talking about a layer of the psyche that's over and above universal monotheism, and therefore a layer that, if we can become aware of it as a species, we will save the human race, very simply.